Anyway, today we're going to talk about proteins, and we're going to look at, it shouldn't be too long of a lecture, not as long as the lipids, but we'll see, you never know. Before we go, I wanted to do a few more of these disorder in American courts things, just to get us going. So the first one, again, the questions are from the lawyers, and the answers are from the witnesses on the stand. What is your date of birth? July 15th. What year? Every year. Okay. Okay. What gear were you in at the moment of impact? Gucci, sweats, and Reeboks was the answer. Question, how old is your son, the one living with you? 38 or 35. I can't remember which. How long has he lived with you? 45 years. Do you know if your daughter has ever been involved in voodoo or the occult? We both do. Voodoo? We do. You do? Yes, voodoo. Okay. Question, all your responses must be oral, okay? What school did you go to? Oral? Okay. Do you recall the time that you examined the body? Answer, the autopsy started about 8:30 p.m. And Mr. Dennington was dead at the time. Let me start over. And Mr. Dennington was dead at the time? No, he was sitting on the table wondering why I was doing an autopsy. Question, are you qualified to give a urine sample? Okay, this is the best one. All right. Doctor, before you perform the autopsy, did you check for a pulse? No. That's the answer. Question, did you check for blood pressure? No. Did you check for breathing? No. So then, is it possible that the patient was alive when you began the autopsy? No. How can you be so sure, doctor? Because his brain was sitting on my desk in a jar. Okay. Question, but could the patient have still been alive nevertheless? Answer, yes, it is possible that he could have been alive and practicing law somewhere. I think that's a good one. Anyway, so proteins. As you know, proteins we get mostly from meat products, but legumes and beans, soybeans, those kinds of things are, for a plant product, very high in protein. But what I want to go over today is looking at completeness, basically leading up to where we will talk a little bit about vegetarianism. So let me just go through and look at some completeness, some definitions, and so we can lead to looking at how vegetarians can get complete proteins and that kind of thing. So protein quality is based on how many essential amino acids are in the food. If you have all the essential amino acids in foods, and there's basically for an adult 8 essential amino acids. Again, essential means we have to get them from food and we can't manufacture them. Now, there are a total of 20 amino acids, so there's 8 that we need to get from food. If we get those, then we can go through some process called transamination, which basically means those amino acids can be converted into the non-essential amino acids. There are situations, though, if we are not getting an essential amino acid, we can't convert, we won't have the amino acid to convert to another non-essential, so it also becomes essential. PKU is an example of something like that, where phenylalanine isn't broken down, so serine becomes an essential amino acid when normally it's not. So anyway, but a food that is considered complete would have all the essential amino acids that a human needs in order to make all the proteins that are necessary. If you're missing an amino acid, you can't make a protein because your body will not make something that's incomplete. and so you just would not make that protein, and that would be a problem. Think about what you think is the highest quality protein food. Take a couple seconds and see if you know what the highest quality protein food is. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Eggs. Egg whites are considered the highest quality protein food there is. It has all the essential amino acids in the highest amount of any food. The yolk, as you know, has the cholesterol and some fat and things like that. But the eggs whites would then have the protein, and that would be very complete. Number 2 would be regular meat products, beef, those kinds of things. Oh, I'm sorry. Number 2 would be dairy. That's what I was showing this cow, and I forgot. No, it would be dairy products. So milk, and that would be the second highest quality, and then we call it flesh, meat. Would be number 3. So eggs number 1, dairy number 2, and meat number 3. Low quality protein foods, obviously these would be ones that do not have all the essential amino acids necessary to sustain life. They would be missing, all you have to be is missing one amino acid, and you would be incomplete. You could have 7 of them that are perfect, but if you're deficient in one, enough so that you couldn't make all of the important proteins necessary to live, then that would be considered an incomplete food. So one of the amino acids is so low that essential amino acids that you would not be getting enough. Partially incomplete would be foods that have enough essential amino acids to maintain, sustain life, but not enough to have maybe adequate growth. I mean, you maybe have stunted growth, but you can stay alive. It might be a problem if you ran up against a health issue where you needed extra amino acid, extra protein to fight that disease. Your immune system needed those. It might become a problem there, but you could live, you could sustain life, but you may not reach what you might call your genetic potential of growth, that kind of thing. So again, incomplete means you're totally missing at least one amino acid, or it's so low that you can't make proteins efficiently enough. Partially incomplete basically means you have enough of the essential amino acids to keep you alive, but not enough that you would have extra, kind of a thing. The limiting amino acid is basically known as the amino acid that's causing your problem. Which amino acid is causing you to become incomplete. So that would be your limiting amino acid. For example, in grains, lysine would be a limiting amino acid in corn. That kind of legumes, methionine would be an example of an amino acid that would be limiting, type of thing. So that, if there are instances, though, where people can, let me start over. If you eat corn raw, say, there is a problem with it being an incomplete food. But as you know, plenty of populations, like for example in Mexico, have lived off corn for many years, and they're able to sustain life. So it's not as limiting. And the reason is because they use lye, and lye tends to make lysine a little bit more available. One of the problems with lysine is it's bound, and so it's not quite as available. But if you treat it with lye, it becomes more available, and so obviously enough that they can sustain life. But if you were talking about limiting amino acids, lysine would be considered a limiting one in grains. What would prevent it from becoming complete, and methionine in legumes. So that leads us into vegetarianism, and there's several different categories of vegetarianism. If you're a vegetarian, that doesn't really necessarily mean that you are vegan, and vegan is an individual who only eats plants and nothing from an animal source. So no dairy, no eggs, so nothing that would come from an animal. Um, but grains and nuts and seeds of vegetables, fruits, pretty much everything else except animal-based. Fruitarians, I'm not sure what their basis is, but they basically don't eat vegetables and obviously no meats, but kind of fruity, I don't know. But anyway, so that would be considered a vegetarian, but not a vegan because they don't eat a lot of vegetables and stuff. And maybe it was people whose their parents made them eat green vegetables or something, and they're just rebelling. I don't know. Lacto-ovo would be, lacto refers to dairy and ovo for eggs. So basically no flesh type foods, but they could eat eggs and they would drink milk or something like that. Lacto vegetarian, also plant and dairy, and then plant and egg. Lacto-ovo peso would be somebody who maybe includes fish type of thing. So there's many categories of vegetarianism. It just depends on where you put, what category you put yourself into. And then one more that I've heard about that it was kind of new to me, but there are some that are fowl vegetarians, okay, that eat more chicken. All right, I know it's early. Anyway, why would you become vegetarian? Ethics, killing animals. Some people are against anything that has blood flowing through it. It's kind of interesting. There was a study. One guy who obviously is not a vegetarianism did this study because the individuals are talking about, well, when you kill animals, they make these noises, and when they're dying, and you're hurting them and that kind of thing. So he actually, I don't know what kind of a microphone it was, but he took a microphone and he stuck it in the ground and pulled a carrot out, and it made noise. And it was, he related it to kind of a crying noise when you pulled the carrot out of the ground. So that was his basis for saying, well, we're killing plants too, and they are expressing, some pain when you pull a carrot out of the ground. So I don't know. Practice of belief. So Eastern religions, Seventh-day Adventists are in that category of vegetarianism. So there could be that reasons. Economics, anywhere from I've heard anywhere from 12 to 15 pounds of grain needs to be eaten by an animal to produce 1 pound of meat. So the argument would be, hey, we can feed a lot of people with 12 to 15 pounds of grain, that kind of thing. So, and it's true. I think the most efficient animal with grains is rabbits. And so there's a push, I forget what it was, I think it was Central America somewhere, where they tried to started raising rabbits because they were the most efficient, and it was like 8 pounds per pound or something like that, or maybe better than that. But for an animal, they were pretty efficient. And then health, obviously, that's where nutrition, the basis of this course is going, is to look at the health aspects, and so we'll look at some of those, the pros and cons kind of a thing. But if you're a chicken, this would be a horror movie for you watching. Yeah, anyway. Yeah, I realize it's early. Okay, I'm trying to keep you awake. Anyway, the idea of vegetarianism, though, especially if you're talking about a vegan who doesn't get any flesh or anything from an animal product. As you remember, when we were talking about complete protein foods, we indicated that pretty much animal eggs, dairy, and meat were complete protein foods. So what happens if you don't get those? Well, something that happens is referred to as mutual supplementation or complementing proteins. Um, and what that means is that you are going to pair up food products that are, if one's deficient in one amino acid, then you would eat it at least at some time, at some point during, and I'm not sure how long it would have to be. Obviously, we need to get our essential amino acids to make proteins, but there's no rule, I don't think, that says you necessarily have to eat them every single day. I mean, there is some aspect that our body can, use amino acids and store them a little bit in the cells and whatnot, and use them when needed. But you wouldn't want to wait a long time without getting an essential amino acid. I'm not exactly sure. I guess I could look it up, but I'm not exactly sure how many days it would matter. I mean, you can fast for many days and still be alive. So it would take some time. So you don't have to eat these foods together in the same meal. They used to say that way back when. But as long as you get them within a reasonable period of time so that your body has them to use, because what's going to happen, it could happen, is you could break down some protein in your body to get those essentially if you need to, kind of a thing. So, so you want to eat them, the foods that complement each other in a reasonable period of time. Let's talk a little bit about complementation here. If you look at this chart, what you can do is separate this chart into basically three categories. You can separate it here with the corn, wheat, rice, which basically would be your grains. And then you can separate out the legumes, the green peas, the dried beans, and so forth. And then separate out the seeds and nuts and seeds and put them in kind of distinct categories. Now, there are exceptions, but this is kind of the reason I put this up here, just give you the idea of what mutual supplementation or complementing proteins would basically be. Is that what you notice is that we have a category for what amino acid they're poor in. So just going back to some of our terminology, basically we said that lysine was the limiting amino acid of corn, and methionine was the limiting amino acid for legumes. And then here's what they're good in. So they're high in this, but low in these. So what you'll notice is that legumes are low in methionine, but grains and nuts and seeds are higher in methionine. So mutual supplementation or complementary proteins would basically be if you ate legumes and then within a reasonable period of time you had some grains or seeds, you would get the methionine that you need. If you only ate legumes for a long period of time, if that's all you had to eat, say you were, up in the hills somewhere and caught in the snow for months and months and months, and all you had was beans, it might eventually catch up with you and you'd have a problem with methionine. And then on the other hand, what you can see is that grains and nuts and seeds are low in lysine, but legumes are high in lysine, so they would complement each other. There's a mutual supplementation, complementary proteins that would allow you to get complete proteins by eating these foods, within a reasonable period of time, and getting those. Down at the bottom, you can kind of see, if you eat animal products, they all complement each other. If you eat legumes, then grains would help. If you eat nuts and seeds, they would help each other. But grains and nuts and seeds do not complement each other because they're both low in the same amino acid, lysine. So then so that idea would be, you couldn't have a whole wheat and sesame seed sandwich and be complementary to each other, or that kind of a thing. But if you ate a green pea and wheat sandwich, then they would complement each other. So that would be something that you could think about for lunch. Anyway, what's the positive aspects of vegetarianism? Especially vegans normally don't have a weight issue. Most vegans are pretty good about they're maintaining their weight. The only issue would be if they ate a lot of oils. If they use a lot of oils in cooking, that could possibly be an issue. But there's we were talking about energy density a few lectures ago, and we were talking about how weight of food determines fullness in some cases. So eating a lot of plant-based foods would make you feel fuller sooner, and you usually wouldn't eat a lot of energy with that. So normally, I mean, there are exceptions, but normally you would find vegans especially would not have a huge issue with maintaining body weight. Normal blood pressure, lower cardiovascular disease, lower GI disorders, because you're getting lots of fiber, you're getting lots of what we're going to talk about in next, I think, is getting a lot of phytochemicals, cancer risk because of increased fiber, increased plant foods, phytochemicals, lower fat, all of those things would be aspects. But you do have, I mean, there are studies that would indicate that, but the other thing you have to think about, the other variable in this whole mix is, normally if a person is vegan, they're pretty healthy, right? I mean, they exercise, they normally wouldn't smoke, they normally wouldn't drink a lot, they normally would have a pretty healthy lifestyle. So that's another aspect that you have to put into this mix, is yes, there are studies done where cardiovascular disease in the population is lower and cancer risks are lower and that kind of thing. But I would hazardous to say, if a vegan was a smoker and a heavy drinker and didn't exercise and that kind of thing, the population risks would go up. So there is another aspect to it. You can't just say, well, I'm going to eat and drink and smoke and do all this and become a vegan and I'll be so healthy that none of this will bother me. No, that's not going to work. So you have to look at that aspect too, is that it's not just the veganism, if you will, that's making a person healthy. It's their total lifestyle that's making them healthy, kind of thing. Negative aspects for most people who aren't vegans, if you just one day woke up and said, gee, I'm going to become a vegan, may not work, because there are some negative aspects. Because think about it, when we plan our meals, most of us would have meat as the center of our whole plate. I mean, we would say, okay, what meat are we going to have, and what are we going to have with this meat? Okay, then, I mean, especially if you're the main meal fixer person, you would look at the meal and you take that meat away, say take your chicken or take your beef away or pork or whatever, and then make a meal. Sure, there are some vegan foods out there that look and kind of taste like meat and that kind of thing, and you can use those, but it still takes an aspect away where you have to do a little more thinking and planning about your diet. You just can't go out to a fast food place and get good, healthy vegan type of foods unless you live in a big city where you can live close to a vegan market or a vegan restaurant or something like that. It's kind of difficult. It's something you have to. It's another thing you have to think about, um, and the diet planning aspect. And some people will try it for a while and say, "Man, this is just too much work. I mean, I have to think about it all the time." Or they go off the wagon and eat some meat and say, "Oh, I just can't handle this kind of thing," and they just quit. So diet planning can be an issue. Now, if you grew up with it as a vegan, then it's not that big of a deal because you're used to it. You're used to that planning. But just to go cold turkey might not be the recommended way to do is to approach it gradually and say, okay, two days a week I'm going to go vegan. And then once you get used to that, you go, well, I'm going to go 3 days a week vegan. And then I'm going to go 4 days a week vegan kind of thing. And then pretty soon, once you get the planning down and you know what you like and you don't like kind of thing, then you can maybe go a 7-day a week kind of thing. But the recommendation is, for people that want to kind of go vegan, is to try it 3 days a week and go vegan 3 days a week. And I mean, that's going to be better than eating red meat, 7 days a week if you miss 3 days a week. So might try that. Social acceptance. I mean, what do you do if you wake up one day and say, oh, I'm going to become a vegan, and then you go to a barbecue? I mean, what do you expect your friends to do? You expect them to have vegan foods for you? Or are you going to take your own food? Are you just going to eat the salad and not the ribs or whatever? And when you go out for pizza, are you going to expect your friends to order you a vegetarian pizza? Are you going to order your own little pizza when other people don't? So there is a problem sometimes with social acceptance, is that you're no longer going to be able to fit in some aspects with your friends because they may be all carnivores, right? And they're really into meat. And they get their meat and their pizza and they go, ooh, this rib is good, and they eat it right in front of you. And pretty soon you kind of feel odd and you feel out of place. But again, if you grew up with that, it's not a problem. But if you're just going to go cold turkey and tell all your friends I'm becoming vegan and they're not, then it can be a problem. In being accepted socially or being able to do things and going over to just, all of a sudden somebody calls you and say, hey, come to a barbecue, what do you do? Kind of a thing. So it could be a problem. It may not be any. It just depends on how tough you are, I guess, whether you can put up with that or not. What we're more concerned with, though, is the nutrition deficiency. There are some nutrient deficiencies that need to be addressed, especially if you're a total vegan. If you're just a vegetarian, which basically means you do get something from an animal product, these may or may not be a problem. But let's just look at those and address those. These are kind of the biggies. B12 you can only really find in animal products. I mean, you can get brewer's yeast and stuff that, you can take supplements that way, or there are some possibilities, but really in plant products you don't find a lot of B12. So the individuals that I know that are really into nutrition and understand this would take a B12 supplement as well as a calcium iron supplement. I mean, where do we get most of our calcium? From dairy products. Where do we get most of our iron? From meat products. Where do we get most of our vitamin D? From dairy products that they add to milk and things like that. Because vitamin D normally is in, the sunshine vitamin, but here in Oregon, where we basically wear long sleeves 3/4 of the year, vitamin D is a real issue. Anywhere north of San Francisco, it's a real issue. So you have to think about that, and that's why they supplement milk for rickets and things like that they've seen in the past. And vitamin D and calcium kind of go together. because vitamin D is almost like a hormone. It really should be a hormone. It's not really like a vitamin. It's more like a hormone that is going to help with the deposition of calcium into the bones and things like that. So that's why they would put it in milk. They kind of work together. But if you don't eat meat, or you don't eat dairy products, or you don't eat anything from an animal source, eggs or anything, because eggs have B12, the dairy would have B12, meat would have B12, then these four would be critical to make sure you get enough. Can you get enough from plants? Yeah, but the problem is, especially for women who need the calcium for osteoporosis, need the iron, because you lose iron, every month, kind of with blood loss and all that during childbearing years. You need to be very diligent about getting nutrient-dense foods in calcium. So we talked a little bit about nutrient density earlier, which is basically the amount of nutrients per calorie. But here we would be looking and focusing on nutrient-dense foods in calcium. So they would have to be calcium-dense or iron-dense. Can you get those? Yes, you can. Do women eat enough bulk to get enough? You can, but as a common rule, women don't eat a lot of bulk, and so it's sometimes difficult for women to get a lot of calcium and iron and that kind of thing in their diet. So common recommendation would be to supplement these four things if you are a complete vegan person. So the other thing is that if you don't eat fish, it's kind of difficult to get all the omega-3s that is recommended. You can get them, again, from linolenic acid. We talked a little about those last time, and flax seeds and different things like that. But the conversion amount limits that, so you'd have to eat a lot again. So we're talking about bulk here. And it's a little bit more efficient, if you're eating fish and that kind of thing. But then you could take a supplement kind of a thing. So vegans would warrant supplementation, I think, unless you're just totally diligent with looking for nutrient-dense foods and that kind of thing. So anyway, so there are positive aspects, there are negative aspects to it. It's just a decision that needs to be made. But let's face it, if you can eat vegan, it is very, very healthy and very beneficial. Okay, but most of us, we like the flavor. It adds some enjoyment to our meals. So what's the point of going? Again, if you go vegan, it's something you have to decide, can I do this the rest of my life without meat? Can I do it for the next 40 years, 50 years, 60 years? And most of us would say no, we can't do that. I don't eat red meat very much, maybe once a month, a hamburger at home or something. Chicken a lot, fish, that kind of thing. So not a lot of pork, but so maybe mainly chicken and fish, and if we eat meat, and then we try, to 3-4 times a week not eat meat at all. But we do have cheese, that kind of thing. So anyway, something you don't want to see when you open up your fortune cookie is that wasn't chicken. Anyway, I don't know if you have ever seen this before. It's kind of interesting to me, and I don't know how often it happens, but talking about dairy products and B12 and stuff like that. What do you eat? What's the best thing to eat while you're drinking milk? Obviously, it would be Oreos, but this is a new step in the Oreo category, is getting Oreoed. I don't know. I just found this somewhere, but I've never been Oreoed. Tea papered. Now I've had that done, which is not fun, especially when it rains. Cleaning up, but being Oreoed, I don't know. Kind of a new twist to tea papering, I guess. All right, so this ends our discussion on protein. We'll talk a little bit more about it, especially when we go into heart disease and cancer and that kind of thing. But this introduces you to some of the aspects of protein. So we will see you next time, and I believe we're going to be talking about phytochemicals.